I'm Kara Swisher. I'm a reporter, and I largely spend my days writing about Snapchat these days, but they have new glasses in case you're not interested, which none of you will be unless you're 12. So we're going to talk actually about a very serious topic, which is something we're starting to really talk about in Silicon Valley a lot, which is education and jobs. There's a lot of fear that advances in artificial intelligence and other areas are going to change the way jobs are created and also how we teach people as they move through life. So we're here with Daphne, who has a really interesting organization. So Daphne, why don't you explain what you're doing very briefly, and then we'll talk about it.
So right now I'm working with an organization called WorldQuant University. That just started in January. This is a fully online master's program in financial engineering. It's donor funded by someone who comes from financial services. So logically, our first vertical is in financial engineering, which has a bunch of different applications. Since its start in January, we have about 200 students on the platform, and they are distributed in about 30 countries, but predominantly in 15 countries, including Nigeria, Kenya, Vietnam. Unlike a MOOC, it is a...
Explain a MOOC, don't just say the
sorry.
Silicon Valley word.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so MOOCs are self-taught online courses. You've heard of Udacity, Coursera, a bunch of other online offerings that universities are doing as an extension of their programming, or people are independently putting classes. I imagine, given the nature of this group, probably people have availed themselves of many of these. WorldQuant is a full 14-course master's program in financial engineering. We're in the process of accreditation from the Distance Learning Association, which is a multi-year process. And ultimately, the goal is to, again, because of the founder's orientation, we've started in financial engineering, is to extend that into data science and analytics in other verticals, right. Which related to the previous, to what Nicholas just was talking about. You can talk about having all these telecommunications, having Internet of Things, having sensors, but you need data scientists and people who are going to interpret and analyze that data, and like the financial service industry has done in the past, use big data to make better decisions.
Okay, that's a term that's thrown around a lot, this idea of big data and how we're moving into the big data world, and everyone right now is probably uploading a ton of largely pointless stuff onto the internet.
Agreed.
Well, especially me. And I have had made so many Brangelina tweets, I don't even understand myself anymore. So
that's their model.
What's happening is this idea that this data is all over the place. There's this idea of big data and interpreting it. And then you talked about sensors, which are drones and sensors and everything else. Yes. It's going to give us this massive data about the world, and there's got to be people that understand it.
Yes, so I think the general, again, in financial services and the sort of theories around big data is people have used data to gather information, to be better informed, and then ultimately the goal is to provide analysis and to make better decisions. I just spent the last 2 days at MIT, which is about to launch an institute they've just launched, it's called IDSS, it's the Institute for Data, Systems, and Society, which kind of makes the point, which is that there's an opportunity now to sort of converge this stuff in a multidisciplinary way, which is, and no longer to think about, the people who just do machine learning and are applying it to helping us make better purchasing decisions, or to help us, buy clothes that fit better, all of which are, consumer-facing worthy applications, but that the reality is in health, in urban planning, in sustainability, right. In agriculture. These are all areas that have not benefited from data. And in the future, with a trained force of people, hopefully geographically distributed, right. Can avail themselves of those technologies.
Understand and actually have actual facts.
And have facts to, again, make local community-based decisions that, whether it's a city and a transportation system or agricultural sensors that GE puts out in a field, and then you need a workforce of people that to interpret that data.
Let's talk about two things in that. So you're trying to train people across the globe, and there's this idea globally that there's talent everywhere, but not accessible. So
Right.
talentism, it's a word that I like to use. There's talent.
Talentism?
Talentism, you can use it freely. But the idea that there are, I was talking to people about Africa, and they're like, well, we've got to figure out. I go, you do think there's not smart people in Africa? Is that your notion? But getting access to them is one thing.
Right.
And having them, so online courses obviously are a way to do that. At the same time, the issue of jobs and replacement of jobs is really a large one
Yes.
that I think people don't think about enough. Just a couple years ago, Travis Kalanick actually told the truth on stage in an interview with me, where he said, the problem with Uber is the dudes in the cars, we have to get rid of them.
Yes.
He was talking about self-driving cars,
Sure.
and that's where, and right now they're debuting a self-driving car in Pittsburgh, which is, he said it was going to happen in 35 years, it's happening 2
Right.
years later.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that intersection of a need to educate people in new things and reaching them in new ways, and then the idea that maybe there aren't going to be that many jobs.
Well, sure, and in our 15 minutes, that is such a massive
Okay,
and
all right.
critical.
No, but I mean, how do you then
so
train
yes,
them?
so the mission of World Quant University and the basic premise was that while talent is equally distributed around the globe, and I think we can generally agree that that's true, opportunity is not. So how do we give opportunity, and certainly the convergence now of technology and changing education and change. I've talked to several people here in the last 24 hours who, I mean, literally several people whose comments were by the time their kids go to college,
Why go
the
to
value
college?
and the challenge of higher education is huge and is not going away anytime soon. And I think certainly the collection of liberal arts colleges that some of us went to and have still associated with, probably in 20 years, many of them will be gone and they will merely exist as real estate assets that I have a theory about that we should then send all of us back to those liberal arts colleges where we can live like communally and learn, and that will be the future of, New England's proliferation of
that's
small
interesting.
colleges.
I think you could just go back and do the things you should have done in college.
Yes, exactly. Well, we always say, that education's wasted on the young, so now here's our chance to go back and...
I don't want to be educated, but that's another issue.
No, but to sit in forums like this.
But the idea of this idea of how education...
Yes, so increasingly it's distributed, and technology certainly has made it possible for people to have access in a way that they didn't, okay? I think internet challenges, and certainly as we, again in the previous conversation, the reality is, like we see on our platform, a lot of people are working on getting a 14-course master's degree using their mobile phones.
Right.
Who would have ever thought?
Right.
And so, but again, all that stuff doesn't really amount to much unless when you get to the other side, you create opportunities. And so part of it is to figure out how businesses and employers are going to recognize those talents. And by the way, they don't all require master's degrees. There's, my hope is in the future as we build this out that we'll have other sort of certification and badging opportunities for people to have those skills recognized by business and in the workplace. In terms of the shrinking number of jobs, I'm sure, again, that's a very long discussion. I think it's true, and there's, a lot of thinkers out there these days, from Tim O'Reilly on down, who are talking about what employment looks like, guaranteed minimum wage to everyone, and working less, and all of that.
So in the near term then, given that thing, I do think there'll be many, many fewer jobs because I think computers will take over almost everything. We just did an interview with Elon Musk at the Code Conference where he talked about that idea. And not many people might want to say the truth about that, but he said that at some point in the future, we'll be lucky if computers treat us like house cats.
Yeah, I think the pendulum's going to swing, frankly. I think if you've been around tech long enough, you know that it goes to this extreme, and then it goes to that extreme, and then people end up somewhere in the middle, where yes, they have to be imaginative.
What I want to get to is that it's clear that computers are going to replace a lot of our jobs, even though we pretend that's not the case. So what should education look like if in that environment?
Well, that's a good and very big question that I'm not sure I have an answer to.
But it has to be online. It has to be.
Well, yeah. Again, this
continual?
Distributed opportunity, I think, is huge. I think that continuous learning, as I was out at a conference last week, an education investment conference. People are talking about lifelong learning. Is people have to iterate on their skills over and over again. It is no longer an option. In some sense, it is the goal is now the process. Okay, there is no end. I'm going to have this job. I'm going to have it for 30 years. It's those who are adaptive and are continuing to create new opportunities. And coupled with the fact that I do think there is employment opportunities where those 21st century skills are being valued by employers. You know, in the work, what I see, certainly in the entrepreneurial community, is, you know, corporations are finally understanding that they want to hire that person who studied philosophy or studied literature. That the technical skills that come with learning coding, which is now more available, also equally online and so on, is the secondary skill, not the primary skill. And that moving forward, people who are able to think critically about that data, because data is just data, that's all it is. And there is a huge opportunity to misuse that data. It's as good, you know, I mean, crap in, crap out. I mean, it's sort of, so you need to collect it in a meaningful way and then interpret it in a meaningful way.
As we're finishing up, I'd love for you to get an idea of what education, given you're doing a certain thing, there's an online element, there's physical education, there's a push in Silicon Valley by a lot of people that you shouldn't go to college at all.
Yes,
like the idea that
Peter Thiel.
Yes. Let's not talk with Peter Thiel.
Okay, let's not. I agree with that.
Makes me slightly nauseous every time I think of him.
Yes, I agree with you.
Not slightly, completely.
It's completely nauseous. Go ahead.
But that is one thing that he says that has resonance among the dozen vile things he comes out with. But explain to me why you think of that, and where you think in the short-term education is in 10 years and in 20 years.
20 years. So I do think that, again, in that sense of the pendulum swinging, I think there is an extreme that now sort of is valuing and will probably in the near term continue to overvalue online education. A gathering like this tells us that that's not the only solution, that people do need to come together, but they need to come together in a way that is meaningful and contextually based, rather than, you know, as people talk about the higher education. I mean, again, you have these buildings that are going unused. You have people who are going to class for a couple of minutes a week, basically, when you put it all together. And how do you create something that over time is flatter, is more widely available? And certainly, I think universities are responding to this in some way. But the chances are that the innovation, that's not where it's going to come from. It's going to be responsive and reactive to that. I think that there's a long-term challenge in this stuff, which is increasingly these vocational skills are being valued, and there's something that's going to be lost in that, which... Meaning? Meaning that I don't think machines are going to take over everything, and I don't, you know, I think that that's a very Silicon Valley-centric view of the world, that there's a long, long way to go between here and there, and that human interaction and people's demand and expectation of it, what humans can offer that is nuanced, that however good your machine learning tools are, is not going to iterate and become expert enough for quite a long time.
Well, it's certainly become an issue in the current election, this idea of how to create jobs and where jobs are. Sure. And again, I think that's, one could just run a conference on that, and it would probably be a really good thing to do. One of the things, the last question I want to ask, we've got just 2 or 3 minutes, is where else, you know, you're talking about them doing it on their mobile phones, these courses, these very complex courses that you used to do, sit in class, and go to, where you physically don't need to be there anymore. There's no need for physical interaction except with others, and you can almost replicate that online in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Currently through Skype and other methods.
And those are tools that are used.
Joking as I may be about the Snapchat thing, but the idea of VR and AR and things like that is really a big deal right now in Silicon Valley. And do you imagine that these courses occur in these? So then you combine the physical presence or the fake physical presence with a learning environment. Where is it going to iterate eventually from your, you see people in
I could see it, sure. I mean, the reality is, for example, at WorldQuant, we have a cohort of 30 students. They're spread all around the world. We do have various tools, online tools, and it's completely instructor-based, unlike the massive online learning environments that are completely self-driven. These are paid instructors who are experts in their field. And they are virtually connecting with these students and creating online chat. The idea that in a few years from now, they could all sort of experientially feel that they're in a shared space using virtual reality or augmented reality would be awesome. And hopefully, again, I think part of the goal here is to keep iterating and applying tools. Also self-monitored and self-timed platforms where people are engaging in the declarative part of learning on their own so that they can come together for the critical thinking part of education. I think we'll see that increasingly. And I think that's true in physical institutions of higher education as well as virtual ones.
But there will still be a test at the end, correct? I'm kidding. The last question I have, and we're going to go, is what's the most unusual thing you've seen in this, just very briefly? What's the most unusual, odd iteration that you didn't expect?
Well, again, very early. We're 6 months in, so I'm a little. I think that we underappreciate the idea of these peers connecting with each other across geographies.
Right.
And I think so. We don't see that as the mission of education.
I mean, people like people.
That people like people, and people like people, discovering that they have shared interests in different environments and have their own contextual expertise and experiences to bring to it, I think is something that we'll see increasingly, and I think is the awesome and exciting part of thinking about, the future of education, and whether that's, drones and satellites in Africa.
Right.
Hopefully that set of kids now, 15 years later, I mean, to speak about the previous billion and a half, that those now have extended opportunities to bring back and influence their local communities.
Right, absolutely. So. Everyone, thank you. Daphne Kiss.
Thanks.